Sierra Langford was the picture of elegance, a devoted wife living in a sprawling estate with her wealthy husband, Brayden Langford. Jaxon Miles was a rugged blue-collar plumber with a troubled past and a charm that could melt stone. No one could have imagined their worlds would collide in a secret so dangerous it would lead to betrayal, deception, and murder. In the quiet, well-manicured town of Willow Glen, everything appeared flawless. Rows of identical houses stood like polished teeth along curved streets. Manicured lawns stretched before pristine front porches, and the scent of blooming hydrangeas drifted through the spring air. It was the kind of place where secrets didn't seem to exist. Or at least, that's what people liked to believe. Among the residents living behind these white fences and polite smiles were Sierra and Brayden Langford. Sierra Langford was known for her beauty, grace, and seemingly perfect lifestyle. She had long, honey-blonde hair, a sharp wardrobe tailored to show elegance without trying too hard, and a smile that made neighbors feel welcome. Brayden, her husband of 10 years, was a man of high reputation, financially successful, articulate, and respected in business circles. He commuted to the city each day in a sleek black car, wearing custom suits and carrying an air of quiet power. To the outside world, the Langfords had it all: wealth, stability, and love. But behind the glass windows of their luxury home, something darker simmered. Their marriage had grown hollow. At first, the spark between them had been genuine. Brayden had pursued Sierra relentlessly in their younger years, showering her with lavish dates, promises of a big future, and unshakable support. But over time, the affection wore thin. Brayden became consumed with his career, and Sierra became more like an ornament than a partner. She hosted social gatherings, attended charity luncheons, and kept herself looking perfect for events, but inside, she felt invisible. Her laughter faded. Her days were filled with routines: Pilates in the morning, grocery shopping by noon, and scrolling through social media in the afternoon, watching strangers live vibrant lives while hers felt like a lifeless script. The house echoed with silence. Brayden often traveled for work and rarely called unless it was about bills or schedules. Their conversations became transactional. He slept in the guest room more often than not, citing late-night conference calls or early morning meetings. Sierra, left alone in the sprawling house, would wander from room to room just to feel something. Her loneliness slowly turned into quiet desperation. One cold, drizzly afternoon, she discovered a leak beneath the kitchen sink. It wasn't dramatic, just a slow, persistent drip, but it was enough to need attention. She called a local plumbing service, and within an hour, a van pulled into the driveway. The man who stepped out of it changed everything. Jaxon Muir was not what Sierra expected. Tall, rugged, and covered in the faint scent of engine oil and aftershave, he looked nothing like the polite service workers she usually dealt with. His arms were tanned and muscular, with tattoos peeking out from under the sleeves of his work shirt. His dark eyes carried a mix of mystery and mischief. He greeted her casually, with a crooked smile that made her heart stutter, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. As Jaxon knelt beneath the sink, Sierra stood nearby watching him work. Something about the scene felt absurdly intimate. The quiet hum of his tools, the occasional scrape of metal, the smell of damp wood mixed with his cologne. He worked efficiently, asking a few polite questions and cracking a small joke when water splashed onto his boots. Sierra laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. When the job was done, she handed him a check and a glass of lemonade. Their fingers brushed, and for a second, everything inside her shifted. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about him. Not just his looks, but the way he made her feel seen, the way he listened when she spoke, how easy it was to smile around him. A week later, she called again, claiming the faucet was still loose. He returned, and this time stayed longer. They chatted more, and she found herself leaning against the counter, twirling her hair like a teenager. By the third visit, she invited him in for coffee after the repair. She didn't even try to hide her excitement anymore. Their meetings quickly turned into something else. At first, it was small touches, a hand brushing against hers, a lingering gaze. But soon, Sierra and Jaxon crossed a line. The first time it happened was in the Langfords' guest house, a separate structure Brayden had converted into an office, but rarely used. What followed was a whirlwind of lust and secrecy. Sierra felt alive again, and Jaxon leaned into the role of the forbidden lover. She found excuses to call him: a clogged toilet, a leaking showerhead, a mysterious noise in the pipes. Brayden was rarely home, and when he was, he paid no attention to Sierra's comings and goings. Jaxon became her escape, her confidant, her addiction. They met in out-of-town motels, back alleys, and even in the empty Langford pool house during the day. Each encounter grew more reckless. She told herself it was harmless, that she deserved happiness, that Brayden would never notice. But behind the passion, darker forces stirred. Jaxon had his own secrets. He never stayed long after their meetings. He checked his phone obsessively. He asked strange questions about Brayden's work, their finances, and their schedule. And Sierra, caught in a haze of desire, answered them without hesitation. What she didn't realize was that she wasn't the only one playing a dangerous game. And Willow Glen, as peaceful as it seemed, would soon be shaken by a crime that would leave its perfect streets forever stained. Sierra's affair with Jaxon didn't feel like an affair. It felt like a lifeline. Each time he walked through her front door, her loneliness retreated, replaced by adrenaline and excitement. She craved the way he looked at her, like she was the most desirable woman in the world. She hadn't felt that way since the early years of her marriage. Back when Brayden used to leave notes in her car and send flowers to her office, that version of her husband had vanished, replaced by someone cold, distant, and more focused on quarterly earnings than on the woman he shared a home with. As weeks passed, Sierra and Jaxon's connection deepened, or so she believed. She began imagining a future with him, one far from the hollow mansion she felt imprisoned in. She envisioned a small house on the coast, just the two of them, away from the expectations and fake smiles. She even began looking up beachfront properties, on her phone late at night, while Brayden slept in the other room. It all felt possible, until Jaxon started asking for money. It began subtly. He mentioned how slow business had been, how the economy hit independent contractors hard, how a client refused to pay for a major job. Sierra offered to help without hesitation. She transferred money into his account, just a few $100s at first. But once the door opened, Jaxon didn't hesitate to step through it again and again. He told her he had debt. He said someone was threatening him over unpaid bills. He promised to pay her back, but the money kept disappearing. Despite the red flags, Sierra kept giving. She convinced herself that love meant sacrifice, and in her heart, she truly believed Jaxon loved her. He told her they were building something real, that one day they'd be free. She clung to those words like a prayer, but what she didn't know was that Jaxon wasn't sharing those same dreams with everyone. In another part of town, tucked behind a rundown bar called the Gritty Tap, worked Nadia Flint. She was a bartender with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. Nadia had known Jaxon for years, long before Sierra Langford came into the picture. They weren't officially a couple, but their relationship had been on and off for nearly a decade. She had bailed him out of trouble more than once, watched him make promises he never kept, and still found herself tangled in his web. Jaxon never told Nadia everything about Sierra, but she wasn't stupid. She noticed the extra cash, the new phone, the sudden interest in nicer things. She asked questions. He dodged them. But one night, after a few drinks, he let more slip than he intended. He bragged about a rich housewife who was hooked on him, said she'd given him thousands already. Nadia warned him to be careful, reminded him how things ended the last time he got too close to someone with a lot to lose. Meanwhile, Brayden Langford remained oblivious, or so Sierra thought. In truth, Brayden had begun noticing inconsistencies. He was a numbers man, and the numbers weren't adding up. He saw strange withdrawals from their joint account, noticed valuable jewelry missing from the safe, and even stumbled upon a credit card charge at a motel in a neighboring town. At first, he dismissed it. Then, the pattern grew. When Sierra left her phone unattended one evening, he checked it. What he saw confirmed his worst suspicion. Instead of confronting her, Brayden acted with precision. He contacted a private investigator, named Coulter Dames. Coulter was discreet, efficient, and experienced with infidelity cases. Within a few days, he delivered photos of Sierra and Jaxon meeting behind the guest house and slipping into motels under fake names. Brayden didn't react with anger. He didn't yell or break things. Instead, he began preparing. He met with his attorney. He transferred investments to accounts Sierra couldn't touch. He made plans to quietly remove her from the will. If she wanted a new life, she would have to do it without his fortune. Sierra remained unaware. She was too consumed by her fantasy. When Jaxon started talking about escape plans, fleeing the state, starting fresh, disappearing together, she took it seriously. But when he asked more directly about Brayden's money, her answers became more detailed. She told him about life insurance policies, trust funds, assets Brayden had hidden even from his parents. She thought she was sharing a dream. Jaxon was taking notes. Around this time, Jaxon grew bolder. He stopped wearing his uniform during visits, showing up in casual clothes instead. He started texting her late at night, asking pointed questions about Brayden's routines, when he traveled, where he kept the keys, whether the home had security cameras. Sierra answered without hesitation, believing these were the kinds of questions someone planning a future would ask. She never once considered that the man she loved could be planning something far darker. The air between them began to change. Jaxon, once sweet and attentive, started acting distant when he didn't get what he wanted. He complained more. He pressured her about the money. He talked about how Brayden was the only thing standing in their way. Sierra, emotionally fragile and terrified of losing what they had, started to agree. The more Brayden pulled away, the more Jaxon filled the void. Sierra found herself stuck between two men, one who had given up on her and one who claimed to need her. In her desperation, she failed to see the cracks forming beneath the surface. She thought she was in control. She thought she was chasing happiness. But in truth, she was being pulled deeper into a trap carefully laid, not by fate, but by the very man she trusted with her heart. And soon, that trap would snap shut, with fatal consequences. Brayden Langford was not the kind of man who acted on impulse. He was deliberate, controlled, and deeply strategic, traits that had made him one of the most successful business consultants in the region. So, when he learned of Sierra's affair, he didn't spiral into rage. Instead, he calculated. The betrayal cut deep, yes, but what angered him more was her willingness to squander everything they had built together for a man who carried tools in the back of a rusted van. It was insulting, but even more disturbing were the layers of deception unfolding before him. He followed the evidence with a clinical eye, dissecting each piece that Coulter Dames, the private investigator, provided. He saw the photos of Sierra handing envelopes to Jaxon, saw the digital trail of money transfers, and read the transcribed texts filled with affection, plans, and references to his own demise. One message stood out above the rest. It would all be so much easier if he just wasn't around. Brayden read it 3 times, emotionless. Then he forwarded it to himself, saved it in a hidden folder, and poured himself a drink. That message was not just a sign of infidelity. It was a potential threat. And now, the game shifted from quiet divorce planning to something far more serious. Brayden was a man of resources, and he would use them. He hired a cyber investigator to monitor Jaxon's digital footprint. Within days, he had access to the plumber's bank records, private messages, and location history. What he found sickened him. Jaxon wasn't just conning Sierra. There were other women, 2 in neighboring towns, one of whom had also sent him money under the guise of a romantic future. He manipulated them all with charm and promises, each one believing she was the only one he truly loved. But Sierra, she was the golden goose. Married to a millionaire, emotionally starved and desperate for attention, she was the perfect target. And now Brayden saw the full picture. Jaxon didn't want love. He wanted access. Access to wealth, access to property, access to a future funded by someone else's demise. While Brayden planned his next move, Sierra began to unravel. Jaxon's demands were growing, and with each passing day, he seemed less like the man she fell for, and more like a stranger in her home. He talked incessantly about freedom, about getting out before it was too late, about taking risks. Sierra had moments of hesitation, fleeting doubts, but she pushed them aside. She had come too far to back down. She had handed over money, shared secrets, made promises. Backing out now would expose her to consequences she wasn't ready to face. Then Jaxon introduced a new idea. He told her they couldn't wait any longer. Brayden was becoming suspicious, and soon, everything would come crashing down. He suggested a solution that made Sierra's stomach twist. An accident. Something simple, fast, untraceable. Maybe a staged robbery, maybe a fire. He'd handle it all, he promised. She just had to be ready when it happened. Sierra didn't answer right away. That night, she sat alone in the master bedroom, staring at the reflection of herself in the vanity mirror. The woman staring back was no longer the quiet, obedient wife from just a year ago. This woman had secrets. This woman had crossed lines. She wondered if it was too late to turn around, but the fear of losing everything, Jaxon, her imagined future, even her reputation, pushed her further down the path she never thought she'd walk. Meanwhile, Brayden continued orchestrating his defense like a symphony. He installed hidden cameras throughout the house, placed GPS trackers on Sierra's car, and gave Coulter one final task: get close to Jaxon. Coulter posed as a potential investor in Jaxon's expanding plumbing business, offering a partnership that would give him capital and legitimacy. Jaxon, blinded by greed, took the bait. Through their meetings, Coulter gathered even more intel, recordings of Jaxon bragging about his hold over Sierra, about how rich wives were easier to break than old pipes. He spoke carelessly, arrogantly, assuming no one was watching. But Brayden was watching. He now had more than betrayal. He had motive. He had premeditation. He had enough to destroy them both. Then came the night. Everything shifted. Sierra returned home from a discreet meeting with Jaxon and found the house eerily quiet. Brayden wasn't on his usual call, and the lights in his study were off. She walked into the kitchen and froze. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jaxon. "Did you tell him?" Her heart raced. She hadn't. At least, she didn't think she had. Then she saw it. An envelope on the counter with her name in Brayden's handwriting. She opened it slowly, hands trembling. Inside were photos, screenshots, bank statements, messages, everything. She dropped the papers, panic setting in like a fog. He knew everything. All of it. She didn't sleep that night. She didn't eat the next day. And by the third evening, Jaxon began to press harder. "Is it done?" he texted. "We don't have time." Sierra didn't answer. Across town, Brayden met with a detective named Ramiel Knox, a former friend and a quiet ally within the police department. Without revealing too much, Brayden handed over a folder of documents and evidence. He asked Ramiel to keep it off the record for now, but to prepare for the possibility that his life might soon be in danger. Brayden wasn't afraid of dying, but he refused to go down without ensuring both of them would fall with him. A storm was building, slowly but surely, and when it finally hit, not everyone would survive it. Rain fell hard on the Langford estate that night, washing the windows in a steady rhythm, as if trying to cleanse the rot that had quietly taken root inside. Brayden stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass in his study, watching the storm unfold with eerie calm. Behind him, monitors quietly played surveillance footage. Sierra sneaking out in the middle of the night, Jaxon parking a few blocks away, their whispered meetings under shadows. He had it all. He had waited patiently, feeding their arrogance, while building a case stronger than either of them could imagine. Across town, Sierra sat in Jaxon's cluttered apartment, eyes wide and bloodshot. She hadn't slept properly in days, and her nerves were wearing thin. Jaxon wasn't helping. He paced the floor, tossing out impulsive ideas: take the car and crash it into a ravine, slip something in Brayden's drink, stage a fall from the second-floor balcony. Each idea was more reckless than the last. Sierra began to question whether Jaxon even wanted a future with her, or if she had simply become one of his disposable means to an end. But she couldn't back out now. Too much had been said. Too much had been done. Jaxon had grown paranoid. He started talking about bugs, hidden cameras, and being followed. He told Sierra they needed to act quickly or run. Sierra begged for time, just a few more days, but Jaxon wouldn't hear it. He wanted action. He wanted Brayden out of the picture permanently. And when he looked Sierra in the eye and told her she'd already crossed the point of no return, she believed him. Meanwhile, Brayden's final plan was taking shape. He had arranged for Sierra and Jaxon to believe that he would be out of town on business. It was a lie. One meant to bait them into making a fatal move. Coulter Dames had wired the home with additional recording devices, and Detective Ramiel Knox had agreed to monitor everything from a secure, undisclosed location. What Brayden needed now was patience and a willingness to let his wife make her final mistake. On the evening of Brayden's supposed departure, he left a visible trail of suitcases by the door, confirmed a phony flight online, and sent scheduled messages to colleagues, reinforcing the illusion that he was away on business. Then he quietly relocated to a hidden surveillance room in the basement, one Sierra didn't know existed. From there, he could watch the house, monitor audio, and contact Ramiel the moment anything went wrong. Sierra entered the home just past midnight. She was dressed in all black, nervous but determined. Jaxon followed 5 minutes later, parking his van on the far edge of the property and creeping through the garden like a thief in the night. He wore gloves, a dark hoodie, and carried a slim crowbar tucked beneath his jacket. The cameras caught everything. Sierra whispered instructions. The plan was to stage a robbery gone wrong. Brayden was supposedly away, but they'd claim he returned unexpectedly and interrupted a burglar, Jaxon. She would act distraught, tell police she had no idea who the man was, then later claim she'd been too scared to admit the truth. Jaxon found the idea idiotic, but Sierra was adamant. She had practiced the lines. She had rehearsed the tears. They moved through the house with eerie calm, setting the stage. Jaxon broke a window in the back to simulate forced entry. He knocked over a vase, rifled through drawers, and left faint, muddy footprints on the tiles. Sierra stayed near the front, heart pounding, occasionally glancing upstairs, convinced that somehow Brayden was watching, and he was. From below, Brayden recorded every step. He waited until Jaxon pulled a knife from his waistband, something never discussed in the plan, and whispered that he'd take care of it, cleaner than expected. That was when Brayden made his move. He triggered the silent alarm connected to Ramiel's team and began to make noise upstairs. Heavy steps, a creaking door, and a hallway light flipping on. Sierra froze. Jaxon's eyes widened. The man who was supposed to be hundreds of miles away was home. Panic surged. Jaxon lunged toward the staircase, weapon drawn. Brayden never intended to confront him physically, but the situation had now crossed a dangerous line. As Jaxon rushed up the stairs, Sierra screamed, not for help, but in horror. She hadn't signed up for this. This was no longer pretend. Suddenly, flashing lights lit up the driveway. Police flooded in with weapons drawn, storming the home before Jaxon could reach the top floor. He was tackled mid-step, the knife flying from his hand. Sierra was restrained on the floor, crying hysterically. unable to form a single coherent sentence. The house was filled with chaos, sirens, voices, the sound of betrayal finally being dragged into the light. Brayden emerged moments later, calm and composed, his hands raised as instructed. He pointed to the basement and told the officers everything they needed to know. Coulter handed over the hard drives. Ramiel personally arrested Jaxon on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and home invasion. Sierra was taken separately, placed in the back of a cruiser, under suspicion of being a co-conspirator. As dawn broke over the estate, Brayden stood in the doorway, watching as his wife was driven away. He felt no joy, only relief. It was over. The lies, the pretending, the slow decay of a marriage built on appearances, it was all done now. But the story was far from finished. Behind jail walls, secrets would continue to spill. And as the investigation dug deeper into the connection between Sierra and Jaxon, even darker truths would emerge, ones that no amount of planning could have predicted. The courtroom was packed on the morning Sierra Langford's trial began. Journalists filled the benches, cameras waited outside the courthouse doors, and curious spectators lined up for a glimpse of the woman whose affair with a plumber had shattered the illusion of one of Langford County's most prominent families. Brayden Langford, though not testifying that day, arrived quietly through a side entrance, his face unreadable. He had become a symbol of wealth, betrayal, and the cold efficiency with which a man could dismantle a carefully crafted web of deceit. Sierra's legal team leaned hard into the defense of manipulation. They painted her as emotionally vulnerable, caught in a storm she couldn't control, seduced by a man who used charm to mask his selfish motives. They described Jaxon Miles as an opportunist, a criminal with a history of questionable behavior and an eagerness to destroy anything that stood in his way. It was Sierra, they argued, who had been exploited, her loneliness preyed upon, her insecurities weaponized. But the prosecution had something stronger than arguments: evidence. Surveillance footage showed Sierra leading Jaxon through the house. Audio clips caught her suggesting that Brayden's unexpected return would make the staged robbery seem more authentic. Her fingerprints were found on the broken window, and digital messages retrieved from Jaxon's phone exposed conversations discussing Brayden's habits, his travel dates, and worst of all, the phrase, "no witnesses, no problems," under her name. Jaxon, in a desperate bid to reduce his sentence, agreed to testify. Shackled and pale, he took the stand with bitterness etched into every word. He claimed Sierra was the mastermind, that she manipulated him with false promises of money, love, and a new life. He said she had grown tired of Brayden, not because he mistreated her, but because he was in the way. According to Jaxon, the plan was hers from the beginning. He was just the tool. His testimony unraveled whatever sympathy the jury may have felt for Sierra. Her once pristine image had already been stained by scandal. But hearing her lover betray her in open court was the final blow. She lowered her head, hands clenched in her lap, while the prosecution described her as calculating, cold, and hungry for control. They reminded the jury that Brayden had given her everything: wealth, status, protection, and in return, she had plotted to end his life. Brayden never made eye contact with her during the trial. He sat still, his gaze fixed ahead, detached from the emotional chaos unfolding behind him. His statement, submitted in writing, was read aloud by the prosecutor. It spoke of betrayal not just as a husband, but as a man who had once trusted completely. He described the feeling of waking up next to someone who had already begun imagining a world without him. He wrote of the hollow silence he lived in for weeks while collecting evidence, pretending everything was fine. And he ended his statement with one line: "You don't kill the person you hate most, you kill the one who knows you best." The jury took less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. Sierra was found guilty on all charges: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and obstruction of justice. She remained silent as the verdict was read, her expression a mask of disbelief. Jaxon, sentenced separately, received 40 years with no chance of parole for the attempted killing and cooperation in the plot. Sierra's sentence was even harsher: life in prison, with eligibility for parole only after 30 years. News of the trial and its outcomes spread fast. Social media exploded with commentary, dissecting every detail, from the affair to the arrest to Brayden's icy calm throughout the entire process. The Langford name, once associated with business success and civic leadership, now carried the weight of scandal. But Brayden seemed untouched by it. He returned to work weeks after the trial, released a brief statement thanking the justice system, and then retreated from the public eye. In prison, Sierra struggled to adjust. The life she had once curated with care, designer clothes, lavish brunches, summer holidays, was gone. Her name was now a cautionary tale whispered among inmates and criminal psychologists alike. She spent most days in silence, refusing interviews and rejecting visits from anyone she had known before the arrest. Her only connection to the outside world was a journal she kept, pages filled with fragmented thoughts and unanswerable questions. Jaxon, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. His deal had bought him time, but not peace. Other inmates viewed him as weak, a man who turned on his lover to save himself. He endured beatings, threats, and solitary confinement. The romance he had once clung to was now a footnote in his life of regret. As for Brayden, he sold the Langford estate months later and moved to a quiet coastal town under a different name. He never remarried. Rumors swirled about his involvement in private investigations, or whether he had written a memoir under a pseudonym, but nothing was confirmed. He had disappeared, leaving behind a legacy not of tragedy, but of resolve. The story of Sierra and Jaxon didn't just expose an affair. It revealed the dark depths of deception, the danger of unchecked desire, and the way a single secret could fracture an entire world. It reminded everyone that love, when built on lies, often ends not in heartbreak, but in destruction.